Amuna Tira Vanachariya Ayara Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Ainam namaskritam Ram chaiva narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Astaprayeshavadrishu Vidyam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki. So, today we're going to finish chapter 10. So I thought let's just have a brief summary of the previous two classes, and we will quickly look at everything that happened in chapter 10. Can anyone remember 2 classes ago, Mother Ananda's class? Anything you remember that it was about? Yes, impeccable.
Because Mother Prabhu also summarized the classes from the day before. About Krishna talks about 2 qualifications, like taking his shelter and being detached, and then performing one's duties in Varnashram.
So before chapter 10, it was all the different gurus that taught us how to be detached. So then once you can be detached, what do? Then you focus your mind on Krishna, try and take shelter of Krishna. It also mentioned the spiritual master and the importance of the spiritual master. There was the very nice analogy of kindling sticks, 3 different kindling sticks. And then in yesterday's class, Madhava Prabhu was speaking about, well, Krishna was basically saying, some philosophers would speak against what I'm trying to say, and they would argue that fruitive activities and enjoying the fruits of your actions is the be-all and end-all of life and of existence. But then Krishna started explaining that if you follow this process of ritualistic ceremonies and sacrifices and fruitive endeavors, even if you do it perfectly, what's the end result? It's temporary. You can go all the way up to the heavenly planets. Now, be very careful. There's a distinction between the heavenly kingdoms, heavenly realms, and the spiritual world. Those two are not the same. Within this material world, there are heavenly realms where everything is so nice. We heard some descriptions yesterday. They'll even sing songs about you. You can become a demigod in the heavenly planets, and you'll have some choir around you singing your glories. But it's temporary. Even if you perform all these ritualistic activities perfectly, which means every little syllable of every mantra needs to be chanted correctly, and every ingredient in the sacrifice needs to be perfect, still, you'll just get this result, which is temporary. But in today's class, now, so it showed us if you perfectly, according to the scriptures, follow ritualistic ceremonies, what you'll get. Now we'll look at when things go a little bit worse, and when you become attached to the fruit of activities to the point where things become a little bit sinful. So we're going to look at that. We're going to start with verses 27 to 29. Maybe we could just start with Rahel, and we're going to read to the end of the chapter.
If a human being is engaged in sinful, irreligious activities, either because of bad association or because of his failure to control his senses, such a person will certainly develop a personality full of material desires. It thus becomes miserly towards others, greedy, and always anxious to exploit the bodies of women. When the mind is so polluted, one becomes violent and aggressive, and without the authority of Vedic injunctions, slaughters innocent animals for sense gratification. Worshipping ghosts and spirits, the bewildered person falls fully into the grip of unauthorized activities and thus goes to hell, where he receives a material body infected by the darkest modes of nature. In such a degraded body, he unfortunately continues to perform inauspicious activities that greatly increase his future unhappiness, and therefore he again accepts a similar material body. What possible happiness can there be for one who engages in activities inevitably terminating in death?
Hare Krishna. That's quite a combination of verses there. Okay, let's keep going.
In all the planetary systems from heavenly to hellish, and for all of the great demigods who live for 1,000 yuga cycles, there is fear of me in my form of time. Even Brahma, who possesses the supreme lifespan of 311 trillion and 40 billion trillion years, is afraid of me.
Material senses create material activities, whether pious or sinful. The modes of nature set the material senses into motion. Living entity, being fully engaged with the material senses and modes of nature, experiences the various results of fruitive work.
As long as a living entity thinks that the modes of material nature have separate existences, he will be obligated to take birth in many different forms and will experience varieties of material existence. Therefore, the living entity remains completely dependent on fruitive activities under the modes of nature.
The conditioned soul who remains dependent on fruitive activities under the material modes of nature will continue to fear me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, since I impose the result of one's fruitive activities. Those who accept the material concept of life, taking the variegatedness of the modes of nature to be factual, devote themselves to material enjoyment and are therefore always absorbed in lamentation and grief.
When there is agitation and interaction of material modes of nature, the living entities then described in various ways, such as powerful time, the self, Vedic knowledge, universe, one's own nature, religious ceremonies, and so on.
Sri Uddhava said, "O my Lord, a living entity situated within the material body is surrounded by the modes of nature and the happiness and distress that are born of activities caused by these modes. How is it possible that he is not bound by this material encirclement? It may also be said that the living entity is ultimately transcendental and has nothing to do with the material world. Then how is he ever bound by material nature?"
Oh, my Lord, Akuta, the same living entity is sometimes described as an eternal condition and at other times as eternally liberated. I am not able to understand, therefore, the actual situation of the living entity. You, my Lord, are the best of those who are expert in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity and one who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what various ways would one remain situated, enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, and move about?
Okay, that's the whole chapter. So, so like I said, Krishna is describing what happens when in the pursuit of trying to follow the Vedic system of regulated fruitive activities, we can become a little bit overly attached to those fruits of our actions, which brings us more under the control of the modes of nature and then leads to various sinful activities and sinful reactions. At the end of the chapter, Uddhava says to Krishna, how do we see the difference between someone who's actually liberated and someone who's conditioned? He's kind of hinting at the fact that externally it could look the same. And he mentioned it, sleeping, evacuating, eating. Sorry. So the conditioned and liberated living entities, they're both within this material world we see. So externally, they could actually appear to be the same. So I guess in the next chapter, Krishna will then explain to them what's actually the difference. But we'll talk about that today as well. So it's not a very nice picture that's painted. I imagine it like this. When you try and play this game of karma and, ritualistic activities, trying to enjoy the fruits of your actions, it's like a roller coaster. And that was described yesterday as well. The roller coaster can take you very high, but then you have to come down again. And sometimes I would say the analogy is like this. What's described here is sometimes when you come down, either the roller coaster goes off the tracks completely, or maybe it throws you out. It comes down with so much force that it throws you out and you just fall and fall. It's like a chain reaction that's described here. Okay, so now let's look at the purport for 27 to 29. Who would like to read maybe one paragraph at a time? Okay.
In the Vedic analysis of civilized life, there are two paths. One who takes the path of Nivritti Marga immediately renounces material sense gratification and purifies his existence by performance of austerity and devotional service. On the path of Pravritti Marga, one furnishes a steady supply of sense objects to the senses, but one consumes such sense object under strict regulations and through ritualistic ceremonies, thus gradually purifying the heart and satiating the material senses. Unfortunately, as explained in this and previous verse, the path of Pravritti Marga is extremely volatile because rather than becoming detached, the living entity often becomes uncontrolled and fully addicted to further sense gratification. In the previous verse, the path of regulated, authorized sense gratification was described. And in this verse, the path of unauthorized, demoniac sense gratification is described.
Someone else like to read the next paragraph?
In this verse, the words Sangad, Asatam, Vijitendriya are very significant. One may fall down into sinful life by
By bad association, or even in good association, one may fail to control his senses. Ultimately, each living entity is responsible for his existential situation. The word adharma, rat, in this verse indicates those engaged in excessive sex life, meat eating, drinking, and other inauspicious activities that transgress the codes of civilized human life. Being in the mode of ignorance, these persons develop such a cruel mentality that they do not consider any festive occasion complete without the consumption of large quantities of meat obtained by slaughtering helpless animals. Eventually, such persons become influenced by ghosts and spirits who deprive them of all ability to discriminate between right and wrong. Losing all sense of decency, they become fit candidates for entrance into the darkest modes of material existence. Sometimes these lusty, intoxicated carnivores, considering themselves pious, pray to God in a useless way. Afflicted by innumerable material desires, they rotate from one material body to another without experiencing true happiness. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has noted that material life is so disturbing that even if one is allowed to live for an entire day of Brahma, approximately 8,000,000,040 something years, years, one will eventually be afflicted by the fear of death. In fact, Brahma himself is disturbed by fear of death. What to speak of tiny human beings who live in paltry, what is that? Yeah, paltry 70 or 80 years at most. Thus, as stated here, Kim Sukham Martya Dharmina. What possible happiness can one find within the painful grip of material illusion?
Not a very flattering purport, quite intense, but yet an accurate description. And what does this remind you of? What does this purport remind you of? And I'm thinking it just reminds us of our environment, this planet right now, the world we live in, this so-called civilization that we live in. This is kind of a very accurate description of exactly what's happening right now. Okay, so we're going to look at a little video now. I don't know if you have it ready. So we could just watch some parts of it. So we'll watch until about 3 minutes and 18 seconds. Okay. Let's see what's this gentleman going to see.
The slaughterhouse, yeah, I saw all those body parts and just brought back memories.
Based on your experiences, what would you then choose to become an animal advocate rather than the human rights advocate?
I think that the oppression of animals is the gateway drug to oppressing humans. Because when a child is first told that the dog at his sofa is to be loved and cherished, whereas the pig on his plate is to be abused, killed, dismembered, and eaten for food. And that's the first time that we instill the notion in the child's mind that it is okay to discriminate between two living beings that basically look and seem alike, which is the basis of all forms of oppression. Is that he basically telling one living being that you can live and another that you must die. Living beings who look basically the same.
Obviously, as time passes, there are less and less people with direct experience of the Nazi-led Holocaust. Can you describe in its rawest terms what it is like having your human rights removed and being treated like nothing?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe. It's really, it's probably as close as you get to identifying that when an animal goes through in a factory farm.
What's so similar about it?
There are a lot of similarities between the way the Nazis were killing our people and the way that we kill animals. For one thing, the identification of the victims by tattooing or branding their skin. For another was the use of cattle cars to transport our people to the gas chambers. The crowded housing in wood crates, the deception and the hiding of the crime behind slaughterhouse walls or death camp walls.
What do you say to people that offended if you like that comparison?
Okay, we'll stop there. Sorry, very heavy topics this morning.
Right.
So. Oh, Krishna. Okay, so this video is very, very insightful. This man was asked what are the similarities between his own experience and what he's seen the way we treat factory farm animals today. And he was mentioning a few things like the branding, like the Jews were branded, they received numbers, they just became a number, right? Which is the same thing we do to animals. And then he mentioned the cars, train cars in which they were transported was exactly what had been used prior for cattle. Now, of course, if you understand the laws of karma, you can go deeper into this phenomenon and you can realize that it's exactly the Industrial Revolution and then how large-scale slaughter became the norm. That's the exact energy which then led to things like the world wars. And he mentions it in the video as well, how we treat animals is kind of like the gateway drug, he said, for the oppression of other human beings. So, but we just don't see it like on a large scale globally, our whole global culture, we just are struggling to make that connection. I think it's coming, it's like bubbling under the surface, this realization. We're not fully there yet, but throughout the centuries, many have mentioned this. Greek mathematicians and philosophers, Renaissance thinkers, I think Leonardo da Vinci had some things to say about it. I think Albert Einstein, modern scientists and thinkers, had some things to say about this, about how there's a link between how we treat animals and how we treat human beings. But what this verse is saying is when your tongue and your eyes and your other senses drag you in different directions, your intelligence is lost and you can't see these connections. You can't see how one sinful reaction leads to another. It's a chain reaction. It's like a domino effect. And it's like a tree which the roots just goes deeper and deeper. So I'll ask a basic question. Who in the room has never eaten meat before? Okay. So meat is the only one that's never eaten meat before. And Sean. So we have 2 people out of a room of what, 20 maybe? So it's like 10% or less maybe. So I'll ask you another question. Did you ever, when you were maybe younger, did you ever see someone mistreating a cat or a dog and then become angry? Has anyone ever had that experience? Yeah. But like the gentleman said, yet we were eating other animals, right? So this is not just a description of what's currently happening, but it's a personal description actually of what we've also lived through. Of course, now you're all Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, and we don't want to focus too much on your past. But the point is that what this verse is explaining is something that we actually have personal experience of as well. Now, how do you avoid getting sucked back in to this chain reaction, this cyclical, hellish cyclical system of the modes of nature. Of course, we know that bhakti is the ingredient. Bhakti is the thing that frees you. Okay, but now I'll give you another example of something quite interesting. I don't know if all of you know of the history of ISKCON, but in the 80s, things were a little bit turbulent at times. And there were some very prominent charismatic leaders that ended up, well, not being leaders after a while. There's one particular example. One of my acquaintances on Facebook posted a little story. He said when he just joined in the early 80s, there was a guru. At that time, it was the zonal acharya system. And wherever you joined geographically on earth, wherever you joined, you had to be under the guru that was appointed for that area. So you didn't really have much personal choice in who your guru would be. So he joined, and the guru in that place, he said the Jaya Radha Madhava prayers that we just sang now, that's sung before Bhagavatam class, this person would sing it for hours on end. And they would all just be sitting there, like kind of bewildered, curious, intrigued, not really knowing what's going on. Literally singing like one syllable for like a minute in their transcendental ecstasy. And the person said they would notice that they would have this very opulent silver goblet from which they would take some water every now and then in between their very grandiose singing. And later they found out that there was LSD in the cup. So this person was like in charge of thousands of devotees, but you know, at the same time, they had fallen down. So then during the same time, some disciples of Gaur Govinda Swami back in Bhubaneswar, India, where Nika is from, they were asking him, what is happening? How are these gurus falling down? And he gave a very simple answer. He said that they are not truly seeing the beauty of Krishna. They're not seeing the beauty of Krishna, and then they're attracted by other things that they think are more intriguing or more beautiful. So how do we see Krishna's beauty? In one sense, I would say, again, to use an analogy, if you're really far from Krishna, then you can't properly see him. So you also won't see his beauty. That makes sense, right? Like if Krishna is just like distant, you know, like the father in the sky, the protector, the provider. That's when you think of, when you approach God like that, then Krishna is just kind of really distant. You have to come closer. You have to be so close that you can see the pores on Krishna's skin, on his cheeks, and see like his facial features. That's when you'll really start seeing Krishna's beauty. So how do we come closer to Krishna? Yes, Prabhu. By our service attitude. Service attitude, okay. Yes. That's definitely a good way. Any other thoughts?
By getting, we start the process by which we can come closer to Krishna by getting close to someone who's already seeing the beauty of Krishna, identifying such.
All right. Associating with elevated devotees. Jonathan and then Anthony.
By saying his name, like, hey, Gopi,
Hey, okay.
getting his attention.
That's a very good point. The holy names, yes. Jonathan, what did you want to say?
We can approach him and ask him for a relationship with him.
Right. You guys are hitting all the keywords that I was hoping we'll find. Relationship, names, getting close to those who are close to him, serving them. So it's about relationship. Coming closer to Krishna, it's a relationship. And then there's the holy name, which is the key to unlocking that relationship, right? And then if we think about it in terms of the holy name, then we even have a set, like a little book, a self-help book with relationship advice. And what is that? We were just looking at it this morning during the morning program. Shikshastakam, but there's something else specifically about the holy names. The 10 offenses, yes. So we have all these guidelines. We have the relationship advice, self-help books. And if we can take these things seriously, then we'll see that we'll quickly connect with Krishna as he is, as a person, right? When we can realize that the holy names that we chant, the names are not different from Krishna as a person, and it's about a relationship. The moment we can start taking that seriously and have an eagerness to dig deeper into that relationship, then you'll come closer to Krishna, and then you'll be able to see the beauty of Krishna. And that's when gradually your taste for indulging your senses in fruitive activities, fruitive results, that will fade away. So seeing Krishna as a person. We were just reading the 10th canto recently. And what did we learn there from the 10th canto and from the Vrajavasis, the residents of Vrindavan? What did we learn from them? What did they show us? Any ideas? Yes, bro.
Krishna is not God.
Yeah, that's the right answer.
He's just our beloved Lala.
Just a person, right? What I've been saying now, it's all about the relationship and understanding that it's a person. That's what the Bhagavatam shows us. And the residents of Vrindavan, it's just their little boy or their friend or their romantic, the object of their romantic feelings, the receptor. Just a person. Have any of you ever heard this story about the Sufi saint, female Sufi saint? Her name is, I'm going to butcher this, Rabi'a al-Adiwiya. Okay. I'm not sure if she was a vegetarian. I don't know much about Sufism. I feel like they might be vegetarian. So she came out one day in the village, brandishing a torch in one hand and a bucket of water in the other hand. What was she doing? Any ideas? That's what her fellow villagers thought. What is she doing?
She's gonna burn something down, fire out.
Well, she's going to burn one thing down and then put the fire out in another place. What are those two places? She was going to burn down heaven and put out the fires of hell so that everyone could finally just stop thinking about heaven and hell and trying to attain heaven or attain these heavenly planets that we heard of yesterday, and stop thinking about hell and trying to avoid hell, and stop approaching God only for these reasons. She wanted to burn those two down so that people can just approach God as a person. Right? So that's the key, trying to cultivate a really deep, very personal relationship with Krishna. That's what can release us from all these other interests and preoccupations that we find ourselves being dragged towards in this material world. Okay, but now we're trying so hard, but still we feel the modes are always engulfing us. It can become a little bit discouraging. And we see sometimes someone comes and practices for a while, and the moment they stop practicing, do they fall an inch or do they fall like miles and miles down? An inch? I've seen sometimes some of my friends, they fall quite far down. So there's different reasons. Sometimes someone comes to this practice and they've already made a lot of progress in previous lives. But oftentimes, we're just being carried by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, and we're actually functioning on a much higher level than we're qualified to function on. So we're being carried by the mercy. But sometimes we still ride this roller coaster and we find ourselves, we're not perfect yet. We're not spiritually fully realized and perfect. And the modes of nature, we go up and down. But ultimately, we are growing. the thing is, you have to zoom out a little bit. Let's imagine a graph, and over a year, it went up a little and then it went down further than when it started. But that's the 1 year position, right? If you go back, you look at 5 years or 10 years, it's going up and down, but in general, it's going up, right? So what do we need? What does Rupa Goswami recommend in the Nectar of Instruction? 3 things. Patience, enthusiasm, and determination. That's what we need. As we know, it's the turtle, the slow and steady, that wins the race. It's not the rabbit trying to rush. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So Nitai, can you bring up the other verse and we'll look at this very point. Something very beautiful that's expressed. I think it's actually in the next chapter that we're going to focus on as we go through the 11th. Oh. I can read it for us. So, as struggling sadhakas, what do we do? Do we become despondent? Of course not. What do we do? This verse actually describes exactly the attitude that we should have. Let me just try and pull it up. Maybe Nita will beat me. Yes, you have it? Okay. So, in this verse it says, having awakened faith in the narrations of my glories, being disgusted with all material activities, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still being unable to renounce all sense enjoyment, my devotee should remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. Even though he is sometimes engaged in sense enjoyment, my devotee knows that all sense gratification leads to a miserable result, and he sincerely repents such activities. Can you scroll further into the purport? There's a really nice piece of poetry written by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. I hope we'll find. Maybe. Okay. I think it's in the English. Just hold on. Give you a word to search. But they don't mention his name, unfortunately, in the purport. Just give me 1 second. Okay, you know what? I think I want to know things. Oh. Maybe I gave you the wrong verse, but I have it in my WhatsApp. Just give me 1 second. Sorry. Luckily, I sent it to Advaita Prabhu from WhatsApp. Okay, so in the purport, well, we can't find it, but this is what it says. So the consciousness of that's the state of consciousness expressed by this verse is expressed by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He says, by my previous shameful life, my heart is polluted with many illusory attachments. Personally, I have no power to stop them. Only Lord Krishna within my heart can remove such inauspicious contamination. But, this is the important part, listen carefully. But whether the Lord removes such attachments immediately or lets me go on being afflicted by them, I will never give up my devotional service to him. Even if the Lord places millions of obstacles in my path, and even if because of my offenses I go to hell, I will never for a moment stop serving Lord Krishna. So that's the proper attitude. That's when you have this patience, determination, and enthusiasm. This is the full culmination of that. That we're struggling, but we will never give up. We cannot give up the lotus feet of Krishna. You know, we've had a little bit of a taste, and we need to keep pursuing it, no matter what obstacles come in front of us. That's the proper attitude. So, yes, in this section of the 10th chapter of the 11th canto, Krishna is explaining it can be very troublesome to focus on fruitive activities for the sake of fruitive activities only. It can be very dangerous. You can be dragged down by the mode of ignorance and the mode of passion. So rather add some bhakti, right? If you have a fruitive mentality, try to offer the fruits of your labors to Krishna. After that, come even closer and closer until eventually directly everything you're doing for Krishna. So how do we stop being attracted by these fruits of the material energy? It's by coming closer to Krishna through a relationship so that we can really understand and see and feel his beauty. And then we'll give all these things up eventually. Even if it takes time, but we don't give up. We'll never give up the lotus feet of Krishna. Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have to say. Are there any comments or questions? Yes, Chris.
I was just thinking that given that a lot of other religions, this is about meat eating, their Shastra, their Acharyas, their teachers all say that it's okay. And that there are more humane and less humane ways to treat and slaughter animals. Why don't we support the more humane path for them rather than taking such a hardline approach? I mean, there's an example just in our backyard. There's a slaughterhouse being proposed in Alachua that many devotees are very opposed to, yet it's a big improvement over large-scale commercial slaughterhouse operations. Shouldn't we be supportive of that kind of movement rather than saying no way?
Okay, so I'll say a few things. The first thing I want to mention is, first, this is my personal view. I'm not a theologian or a theological scholar, but I was raised Christian and I spent a lot of time and energy studying those scriptures and then also doing my own research. And actually some publications by devotees also helped me to come to some new insights. For example, the New Testament, in our modern English translations of the New Testament, it's 30-something times that they use the word meat. And in every single instance, if you go to the original Greek or Hebrew words, it does not mean meat, but it'll say something like sustenance or just food or things like that. Nourishment. So sometimes these traditions have been compromised by mistranslations and misunderstandings. So that's one thing I like to mention. But then other than that, yes, of course, lots of souls are all on their own path and have certain attachments that they need to work through. There's a difference. This is the main point I'd like to make. There's a difference between what our Vedic texts proclaim and then how we should personally go and interact with other people, We would be fools if we think that we can just word for word just proclaim everything without any consideration of time, place, and circumstance, or considerations of just being a proper human being when we interact with others, So I would say just be sensitive when speaking about these things. Don't be so quick to just point out the flaws of others. I mean, will that even help you achieve what you want to achieve? If you think that you can help them come to new understandings of God and help them advance spiritually, if that's the goal, you have to do whatever will achieve that, right? So you have to be smart. You have to be diplomatic, tactful. But as far as actually supporting some forms of slaughter, I don't know. I think as Vaishnavas, I would argue that we should be firm because it's not that hard to have a cow in your backyard. You can get all the animal fats you need from the cow's lovely milk. They give enough to their calf and then they'll happily give more to us. You can make paneer steaks. You can do whatever you want, you know, it's not that hard to follow a vegetarian diet. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Stephen.
Did you read The Diet for Transcendence by Stephen Rosen?
No, I don't think I have.
He's I'm sorry, I don't know his devotional name, but it basically, what was it, Prabhu? Satyaraj Prabhu. He's written many books. And one of them is this Diet for Transcendence, which basically does exactly what you were talking about. He analyzes like the Hebrew Testament, the Christian Testament, and like the Quran and other world religions in order to basically see if like they support vegetarianism in like their more in like the scriptural, like pure in the pure scriptural form. It's a really good read. And basically, like you said, yeah, it does. Most religions do.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say, actually, never mind. No, that's it. Fireball.
Before I hear from you, I just quickly want to also mention that vegetarianism was a lot more widespread than we were made to believe. There are arguments to be made that Jesus was part of the Jewish tribe called the Essenes, who were strictly vegetarian. The Essenes were like yogis, basically wearing loincloths and just living in the desert in caves and just doing their sadhana and following a vegetarian lifestyle. And, you know, the ruse is kind of revealed, the ruse is exposed when you just study the early Christians, what's called the Desert Fathers, the very, very early Christians, like the disciples of Jesus's disciples. They were all vegetarian. So yeah, something fishy is going on there. That's very difficult.
Diet for Transcendence.
He's going to text you.
One second.
Something about what Chris was saying. There are times when we can actually engage in a way that it will awaken we hope that will awaken their spiritual intelligence and choose the path of least suffering. Like Narada Muni did in a case of Mrigari the hunter. He suggested, what are these half-dead animals? You should kill them all the way. He actually encouraged him to do the proper kill.
Yeah.
And then he explained why, because you'll suffer less in that way. So that kind of instruction did awaken Mrigari's intelligence. Well, wait a minute, I don't want to suffer. How do I go about not suffering at all?
Right.
So there is in a way, a fine line. I'm not saying as our blank official statement of our movement, but on an individual basis that we can kind of try to fan the spark and feed the fire in a way. If somebody's really struggling, they're stuck in their ways, you know, putting a religion aside, just in terms of compassion.
Right.
Like, why would you if you don't have to?
Right. And you're reminding me of something. I think some of Prabhupada's disciples at one point, they were trying to make some vegetarian propaganda that illustrated the horrors of meat eating and so forth. And Prabhupada said that this is not our business. We're not going to try and promote vegetarianism. We're also not going to do that by trying to expose the negativity in this world. We're just going to focus on Krishna. We're going to be blissful. And, you know, it makes sense. And I highly recommend we all take up Prabhupada's mood in that way. We just... Sorry? The monkeys and pigeons are vegetarians. Yeah, we are Krishnatarians. We just eat whatever Krishna eats. So I highly recommend that we take on this strategy. Just live your blissful Krishna conscious life. And people will become curious and they'll inquire. And then when they ask, what's your diet? You're like, yeah, I'm vegetarian because that's what Krishna recommends. And that's the end of the conversation. And they will understand. Yeah, you wanted to say something? No, your hand was up. Okay. Should we end there? A little longer. Sean wanted to say something?
Strap in. It has been proven statistically that eating meat is not at all beneficial to the production of it. Like the amount of food you feed animals,
Right.
you could feed like 10 times the amount of people, please.
Right. Yeah, a lot of resources are wasted in raising cattle.
Also, if you look at like food chain process, like if some primary to secondary to tertiary, and if you're consuming a secondary, it has like only 10% of the energy that the primary has from the sun. Because plants produce energy from the sunlight from the outside, and water, the main component of energy is from the sunlight.
Right.
And like animals have 10% of the energy from the sunlight from their plant.
Right.
So they'll have to sort of like be 10 times the amount
Right.
of food waste.
There are many different arguments to be made for why it's clear that we're not meant to eat meat. There's also the length of our digestive tract. Like a lion has a very short digestive tract, as far as I know. So the meat's just kind of in and out. Our digestive tract and the process is very long and slow. And it's really not good to have meat in there for such a long time. And you wanted to say something like that?
So tracks are more like omnivore tracks. Lions are obligate carnivores. They have shorter digestive tracts, but our digestive tracts aren't like cows or other vegetarian animals.
And of course, we know how carcinogenic meat is, all these different things. Yeah. On the other hand, I personally don't think a vegan diet is healthy. Ayurveda would say the same. Ayurveda explains that our body has different levels. The skin is like the outer layer and is easily nourished. The skin is easily nourished. You can eat an apple, for example, and it'll give nourishment to your skin. But then you go deeper, you have your flesh, and then you have your blood, and even deeper is like your marrow and your nervous system. And that deepest level needs to be nourished by animal fat. This is what Ayurveda recommends. So I know me and Tulasya and some others usually, we take the vegan option, but actually we're very into dairy. Dairy is very important. And we should always promote the importance of cows, both the cow and the bull. Yeah, on that point, what Sean just said, actually, I had found a research paper. They were just these regular researchers, and they were doing research on what's the best land use. And they studied different things. What if it's just like, we slaughter a bunch of animals, starting with diets, basically, like carnivore, omnivore. And their conclusion was, at least according to these researchers, that the best use of land is, of course, like growing vegetables, but also like having a decent amount of animals, but mostly for dairy production. It wasn't just for that was actually surprisingly, I was there like that's the best. If you get some dairy and you grow a lot of vegetables, that was their conclusion after these. Like they were just like regular people that they're not devotees, they don't necessarily the same worldview as us, but even their research showed like that's actually the best way. I'm gonna try to find that paper. I have it somewhere. Yeah, there's many reasons why a cow and a bull end up being the most resourceful choice and sustainable choice. There's the manure, of course, which is the best fertilizer that you can find. We use very intense chemical industrial fertilizers, which destroy the soil. Actually just ends up destroying the soil, and it goes into the ocean and is destroying the oceans as well. So cow manure is the best option. And then another thing, with our big machinery, when we plow the land, it goes too deep, which again messes up the soil. and the nutrients in the soil. When you use a bull and you plow the land by use of a bull, it goes the exact depth into the ground. That's perfect for the balance of the nutrients. And I don't know the technical details, but yeah. So in many ways, it's clear that if you just work with a cow and a bull, it's the most sustainable. Okay, I think we'll end there. Thank you so much for listening. Prabhupada Ki Jai. In the semi-class.